composer portrays in the music isn't necessarily what the performer will portray, and in turn of what the listener interprets as a result of that.
Yeah, I think a good contemporary example of this is modern day advertising, how music is used to promote different products. The full play, how do you think music is interpreted in contemporary advertising?
Contemporary advertising especially is very prone to taking a piece of music and sticking it in a completely different context to what it was originally written for, which, you know, that's stripping it of any meaning. Because one example would be, if anyone's seen some O2 adverts lately featuring the Dies Irae from Mozart's Requiem, and using it in, like, which originally it's a piece written kind of expressing anger at the idea of oncoming death and all that stuff. And it's used kind of, you know, to illustrate a cat running around pretending to be a dog. It's completely taking it out of context and giving it a new meaning to anyone who discovers it through that medium.
I would agree with that, about the adverts losing the true meaning of the song. However, you could say that some adverts, just some, are manipulated by companies, by the company's desires, to hold part of the originality back in it. I only have one example of this, and this is probably Christmas songs and Christmas adverts. You'll only find the Christmas songs on the Christmas adverts at Christmas, and that's where you could say like that is where the originality still stays there. Yeah.
Any other points? Anyone wants to?
Could you just clarify the jump from Wagner to adverts more for me, please? Any one of you? I'm not focusing on one person there, that's all I need to do. Because I can see what you're doing, but you need to express that.
Well, because Wagner was used as kind of propaganda, I think what we was trying to get at is that possibly companies such as, you know, Tesco's and that kind of harness some sort of relevant propaganda, e.g. like encoded messages within Christmas songs, and harness them towards increasing sales, and yeah, that's what I think we was trying to get at.
So you're looking at propaganda being used for a particular agenda to affect a particular outcome.
Yeah.
And so that was your link between the Wagner example and the advertising.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Great. Thanks very much. Come around with applause, please.
Stuart Hall, encoding, decoding. Yes, there can be these different readings of a message, but is the inference here, I guess this is aimed more at you, but we both talked about this a bit, is the inference here that while we can decide how we want to respond to a meaning, we're still aware of what that meaning should be?
Yeah.
Is that what you're suggesting? I mean, are we still always aware, cognizant of what the sender wants us to get out of the message?
Yeah.
We're kind of back at the blurred lines example,
Yeah.
actually, aren't we, with that?
Yeah, like the recipient is kind of always aware of the encoded message, but then they can reject it due to their own social situations. I think that's what I was trying to say.
I disagree. For instance, in the context of advertisements, you very often get songs that have been covered or placed in a way that has no resemblance to the original meaning whatsoever.
How can that happen? Can you think of a practical example? I mean, I've got in my head a particular advert, which won't be one that probably is in your heads, but how can say within a minute-long advert for Tesco's or whatever, or whatever it is, John Lewis, how can that original meaning that was attached to the song that comes from the author, how can it be bastardised in such a way? I mean, formally, I'm kind of thinking about the way in which it's presented to a new audience.
Because it's sneaky, it comes, because advertising's just always there, hidden underneath everything else. Like, wherever you're watching, or maybe on BBC, you're always going to have ads. You're going to sit through, and even if you don't notice that you're paying attention to it, it's going to be coming in, it's just infiltrating into your mind, and you're just going to get used to that idea, and that's just going to become its meaning.
Yeah, okay.
So basically what you could say is that you can try attempt to resist the encoded original meaning as much as you like, but at some point you're going to start to give in. Do you see what I mean? Because if we're that bombarded by advertising and that level of propaganda to some degree, at some stage we're just going to stop resisting. And we're just going to kind of let them do their thing. I think it's very interesting that you've, sorry to kind of steal your point, but I think it's very interesting that you kind of set this up with Wagner. And I think the real key thing here was not just his friend that he went to the Wagner operas with, but his great-grandson.
Yeah, yeah.
And also the fact that we do know that he did characterise through leitmotif, using tritones and, you know, bestow them upon a particular type of character that was the complete antithesis of the Teutonic hero.
Yeah.
And I do find that very telling. And I think, whilst I absolutely agree with what you're saying, if Peter Kivey is absolutely crucial to this argument, I think it's quite difficult to some degree to ignore the points that have been made there.
Can I ask a question around that? Again, kind of Kellen and Eli kind of talked about modern listeners almost dehistoricized from the original set of meanings. Is it immoral or amoral to listen to something that might be so politically charged as Wagner, with a kind of, oh well, I don't really, you know, I don't really know.
An active process of ignoring.
I have in mind, I have in mind Stephen Fry, who's a huge Wagner fan,
Yeah.
and has done a documentary on Wagner, and you know, here is a man who is clearly, I think it's fair to say probably, clearly anti-Semitic in any way, shape or form, and for whom equality amongst people is clearly a big issue, but he can still happily listen to Wagner and get something out of it. But is that a problematic stance, do you think?
Well, Solomon actually states that music alone is amoral. It cannot communicate any moral or political message. And so, in that sense, it'll be... Sorry, go on.
No, I was like, do you agree with that though?
Yes.
It's all about, oh.
No, I do.
Okay. Right now I do agree with it, yes.
Once again, it's the composer's beliefs, not the music alone, and we can all interpret music in completely different meanings.
But then isn't that kind of going against what you've been saying about the way that it becomes re-encoded with advertising?
Yes, but we're saying it's... Wait, I'm sorry.
I don't agree with that. It can be immoral, just because of the way Hitler used it before his rallies with some of Wagner's music. That's completely encoded with propaganda. So I don't see how you could say that particular is immoral.
But Wagner's anti-Semitism doesn't mean he's not talented, and it doesn't mean he doesn't have the musical ability.
Yeah, no, I know.
Well, that's it, you know, Hitler was an artist, so...
Can I throw another example up in the air and just sort of see how the two sides deal with this? This is the Gary Glitter conundrum. I am a big fan of Gary Glitter's music, but he himself, in more recent years, Rock and Roll Part 1 and 2 is one of the best records ever made. Anyway, but he as a person is a problem. Now the difference between him and Wagner is that I don't think you can listen to his music and get a sense of his extracurricular interests, shall we say, from the music, whereas what you're kind of suggesting
I don't like where this is going.
No, what you're suggesting is with Wagner, you can kind of hear his political beliefs being musically articulate. So, is it all right for me to listen to Gary Glitter? This is the question. because there seems, what I'm trying to get at is trying to unpick the amount to which the music holds within it something which communicates something unpleasant, and the person who made that music having unpleasant views. Do you know what I mean? They're not the same thing.
But they can't ever be truly divorced from one another because you write yourself into your work.
That's what I'd like them to answer, please. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead.
Discuss.
Discuss, yeah.
It's very, I suppose, it's about reclaiming it and putting it in a new context. I don't know, sanitizing it in a way.
Okay.
And
That's
I
good.
think of Gary Glitter. I remember, I think it was a couple of years ago. Did they not do one of his songs on Glee? And there was a huge, like, quite a big
Really?
uproar over it.
Yeah.
Because people were all, no, you can't do that in a kids show because it's, you know,
Yes.
implying all that kind of stuff. It's, I don't know how that ever got resolved. But it was, it's just one of those shows of how kind of, I don't know, politicized it is at the moment.
So effectively what we're kind of arguing here then, what you're probably saying is that the music in and of itself has its own merits, irrespective of the ideologies of the person that created it.
Yeah,
So the Wagner example seems to be a bit of both, because you can listen to Wagner and go, my God, that's an amazing opera,
yeah.
but equally there may be musical motifs in it that you might kind of suggest are sending a particular message which might be problematic.
And is there ever a point where those messages cease to be effective? Because if the music continues to be effective, because there's no way that you can't listen to Ride of the Valkyries and not be moved by that. So that would also in turn mean then that there's a particular longevity to the message of the leitmotif with Wagner as well. And does that ultimately then still mean that there's danger written in the music?
Could you not make it your own though, by decoding it in a different way?
And I mean, in terms of like music, just in general, things with things like that being problematic, what media isn't problematic? What, like, you can't watch TV without saying, oh, this is totally heterosexist, or it's
Yeah,
totally
absolutely.
completely
Does that make it
secretly
right?
misogynistic, and nothing, it means...
Shouldn't you instead go live in a cave?
I'm not for that.
It's like, I don't see how at this, where our society is now, we can't really be picking on music specifically for this when it's a problem that's running so wild in all media in society.
Can I ask one last question, which is kind of related to this last point that I was making? I guess I was going to say, is anyone here arguing? I guess this is particularly for Karen and Eli. Are you arguing that that there isn't, you know, I don't know if you've talked about Roland Barthes' position on this, but the idea of the death of the author. Okay. That actually there is no way in which a recipient can ever truly know the intention of the sender. The author, the musician? Or are you talking about something which is somewhere in between, where you're kind of aware and it might shape your interpretation, but ultimately it's up to you? Is it all ultimately down to subjective interpretation on the part of the listener?
Yes,
Okay.
I think it's all listener.
But surely there's always going to be some examples that kind of fly in the face of that kind of liberal, you know, really nearly hippie attitude.
Don't start all that. Don't start.
Because there's no way that you can really ignore what these guys are saying in respect of the evidence pertaining to Wagner.
If you don't know about Wagner and you hear the music, what's to tell you that the tritones mean Jews? And you know,
Exactly. If you do, if you aren't
sorry,
aware
now
of
we're
the
There's a debate and a debate.
Isn't another good example though when we all listened to A Night on Bald Mountain, and before you told us about it was kind of composed for, was it the night before Halloween or Halloween?
Walpurgisnacht.
Yeah. We all kind of felt the same thing, that terror and something like a chase going on, and no one knew what. We were all in the same context because we never heard that before. Well, I don't know if some people did, but personally I didn't. And we all got the same impressions. So that's just another kind of thing to think about.
Isn't that just because the way music's written nowadays, but it's like what Peter Piper was saying about, oh my God, just because it's expressive of emotion doesn't mean it actually expresses that emotion, because it's using types of musical language that are stereotypically associated with that kind of idea, and that we're just all so used to.
Yeah.
That in itself, just because music's like that, doesn't mean that it does express that idea.
Good. Very good, thank you very much. Okay, my last group, please.
Not very good at debating. Oh no, sorry, I should have said.
Oh, I'm definitely sitting.